When you click Buy Now on Amazon, a countdown begins. We live in an era where the arrival of a cardboard box with a smile logo is treated as a basic utility, no different from turning on a faucet or flipping a light switch. You click a button, a day or two later, the item appears at your door. To the consumer, Amazon is the ultimate monument to convenience. The public narrative surrounding the company's rise usually focuses on this exact interface. We are told the story of the everything store. We are told that Amazon won because it offered infinite selection, aggressive pricing, and frictionless checkout. We credit the invention of Amazon Prime, a membership program that trained an entire generation of shoppers to expect free, expedited shipping as a baseline, right? This is the visible product, and it is entirely true. But it is also an incomplete story. If convenience, wide selection, and low prices were the entirety of Amazon's competitive advantage, the company would have been crushed in the early 2000s. Established retail giants like Walmart or Target possessed massive capital, deep supplier relationships, and physical proximity to almost every consumer in America. They could have easily matched a price cut. They could have built a functional website. Convenience is a surface-level feature. And in the world of high-level business, surface-level features are not moats, they are targets. If a competitor has enough money, they can copy your website, they can match your delivery speed, and they can subsidize their prices to steal your market share. So why couldn't they? Why did traditional retail giants watch helplessly as a bookseller from Seattle methodically consumed the entire retail industry? Because Amazon's real moat was never what the customer saw. The customer saw a store. Amazon was building an operating system for global commerce. To understand why Amazon became inevitable, we have to look past the website. We have to look at the invisible layers of infrastructure, capital flow, and logistics that made the promise of two-day delivery financially survivable for Amazon and financially ruinous for anyone who tried to copy them. The first hidden layer wasn't built with concrete or steel. It was built with time. In traditional retail, the financial model is heavy and slow. The store buys inventory, places it on a shelf, and waits. The retailer pays the supplier for these goods relatively quickly, but the goods might sit on the shelf for weeks or months before a customer finally walks in and buys them. During that waiting period, the retailer's cash is trapped. It is locked inside the unsold inventory. Amazon inverted this reality through a concept known as a negative cash conversion cycle. Because Amazon was an online platform experiencing explosive growth, its inventory turned over incredibly fast. The customer would click buy and pay Amazon immediately. The cash was instantly in Amazon's bank account. However, Amazon had negotiated terms with its suppliers that allowed it to wait 60, 70, or even 90 days before paying them for that exact item. This created a massive rolling window of time where Amazon held the customer's money before it had to pay the supplier. It sounds like a minor accounting detail. In reality, it was one of the most powerful financial engines ever constructed. It meant that as Amazon grew, it didn't need to borrow expensive money from banks or dilute its stock to fund its expansion. The very act of selling more items generated a massive flow of free cash. Amazon's suppliers were inadvertently funding Amazon's ruthless expansion. The faster the company grew, the more free cash it generated. This invisible financial machinery is what allowed the company to survive the dot-com crash while its peers went bankrupt. While other e-commerce startups were burning through venture capital to subsidize shipping costs, Amazon was using its negative cash conversion cycle to fund the next layer of its moat, the physical network. But even here, the public understanding is flawed. People look at Amazon's fulfillment centers and see massive warehouses. They imagine giant storage facilities holding millions of products. But an Amazon fulfillment center is not a warehouse. A warehouse is a place where things sit. A fulfillment center is a high-speed computational sorting machine built in the physical world. If you walk into a traditional warehouse, you see logical organization. All the televisions are in one aisle, all the books are in another. All the toothpaste is grouped together. This makes sense to the human brain. Amazon looked at this and realized it was catastrophically inefficient. If a customer ordered a book, a television, and a tube of toothpaste, a worker would have to walk miles across the facility to collect them. Instead, Amazon deployed a system known as chaotic storage. In an Amazon facility, products are placed randomly wherever there is empty space. A premium television might sit next to a dog toy, which sits next to a spatula. To a human eye, it is complete anarchy, but it is not meant for the human eye. It is mapped by an omniscient database. Because items are distributed evenly and randomly throughout the millions of square feet, a worker or a robot rarely has to travel far to find any specific item. The exact combination of goods for any customer's order is likely sitting within a tightly confined radius. This is not just logistics, it is the application of computer science principles to physical reality. They treated physical inventory the way a computer's hard drive stores fragmented data. By marrying the negative cash conversion cycle with an increasingly dense, hyper-efficient physical network, Amazon was no longer just competing on retail margins. They were competing on the pure mathematics of operational efficiency at a scale the world had never seen. But even this immense, brutally efficient machine was just the precursor to the masterstroke, because building this infrastructure was incredibly expensive. To justify the cost, Amazon had to make a decision that would permanently alter the global economy. They realized that their biggest expense, their logistics network, could be transformed into their most lucrative product. For a traditional business, building millions of square feet of warehouse space and staffing it with thousands of workers is an enormous, crippling liability. It is a massive fixed cost. If consumer demand drops, you're still paying for the empty space and the idle conveyor belts. Amazon's executive team understood this vulnerability, but rather than shrink their ambition, they applied a radically different framework. They decided to take their greatest internal expense and turn it into an external service. In 2006, they launched Fulfillment by Amazon, or FBA. The proposition to independent merchants was simple: send us your inventory. We will store it in our chaotic, hyper-efficient fulfillment centers. When a customer orders your product, we will pack it, ship it, and handle the returns. To the public, this just looked like an expansion of selection. There were suddenly millions of new, obscure items available for prime delivery. But strategically, it was a profound shift in the very nature of the company. By opening up their logistics network, Amazon transformed from a store that sold things into a utility that taxed the act of selling. They allowed independent merchants to piggyback on their massive economies of scale, but in exchange, they captured a percentage of every transaction. More importantly, they solved their fixed cost problem. The financial burden of maintaining all those physical warehouses was no longer borne by Amazon alone. It was subsidized by thousands of third-party businesses who had no choice but to use the platform if they wanted access to the modern consumer. The merchants were no longer just competitors, they were captive clients. Amazon had built a moat so wide and so expensive that the only way for other businesses to survive was to pay a toll to cross it. But this philosophy of externalizing internal infrastructure did not stop at cardboard boxes and physical warehouses. The exact same doctrine was quietly being applied to the digital realm, resulting in what is arguably the most lucrative business pivot in modern history. In the early 2000s, Amazon was struggling with its own digital growth. As the company expanded, its software engineers were constantly bogged down by the basic repetitive tasks of setting up new servers, configuring databases, and building foundational infrastructure for every new project. It was slow, and in the tech world, friction is fatal. The mandate came down from leadership to completely restructure how the company's software was built. Every internal team was ordered to decouple their systems. They were required to expose their data and their functionality through standardized, service-oriented interfaces. There could be no more tangled, hidden code. Everything had to be built as a modular component that could be easily accessed and utilized by any other team in the company. This internal restructuring was painful and complex, but it forced Amazon to treat computing power, storage, and databases not as custom, artisanal projects, but as basic, scalable utilities. Once they had perfected the system internally, they executed the exact same playbook they used for their physical warehouses. They opened it up to the outside world. They called it Amazon Web Services. Before or ASM, if a startup wanted to build an internet company, they had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars buying physical servers, renting space in data centers, and hiring specialized engineers to maintain them. It was a massive barrier to entry. ASM eliminated this barrier overnight. They allowed anyone, from a teenager in a garage to a massive enterprise, to rent enterprise-grade computing power by the hour, swiping a credit card to scale up or scale down instantly. AWS became the invisible backbone of the modern internet. Companies like Netflix, Airbnb, and Uber built their entire global empires on top of Amazon servers. And just like the third-party merchants paying a toll to use Amazon's physical warehouses, the world's most innovative software companies were now paying a monthly tax to use Amazon's digital infrastructure. What began as an internal solution to speed up their own developers had become a globe-spanning high-margin monopoly that generated the billions of dollars in operating profit necessary to ruthlessly subsidize their low-margin retail business. This is the hidden system. When you look at FBA and RBWare side by side, you stop seeing Amazon as an e-commerce website. You begin to understand the deeper philosophy that drove their dominance. It is a concept often referred to in engineering as building primitives. A primitive is a foundational building block. It is a raw, base-level component that does one thing perfectly and can be combined with other primitives to build infinitely complex systems. Most companies try to build finished, polished products for a specific target audience. Amazon built primitives. They built a world-class payment processing primitive. They built a global fulfillment primitive. They built a raw computing power primitive. Once you build the underlying primitives of an industry, you no longer have to guess what the consumer wants. You just provide the infrastructure and let the rest of the market do the innovating for you. If a new trendy gadget takes the world by storm, Amazon doesn't necessarily need to invent it. The company that does invent it will likely host their website on AWS and ship the product through FBA. No matter who wins the beta war on the surface, Amazon profits at the infrastructural layer. But the true power of these primitives, the e-commerce storefront, the FBA logistics network, and the AWS logistics network, and the AWS digital backbone, did not lie simply in their isolation. The ultimate structural advantage was found in how they interlock to create a self-reinforcing loop of inevitability. Within Amazon, this concept is famously known as the flywheel. In traditional business schools, the flywheel is often taught as a neat marketing diagram, but Amazon's executive team treated it as a thermodynamic engine. The mechanics were brutal and relentless. Lower prices led to more customer visits. More customer visits attracted more third-party sellers to the platform. More sellers resulted in greater selection and even lower prices through fierce internal competition. This initial loop drove immense volume, and volume was the key that unlocked the next, far more dangerous level of the flywheel. By pushing unprecedented volume through their systems, Amazon could justify massive investments in fixed costs, more chaotic fulfillment centers, more servers, better sorting robotics. These investments lowered the cost structure of the entire company, allowing them to further slash prices and accelerate delivery speeds, which in turn drove even more customer visits. It was a perpetual motion machine fueled by scale. To sustain this machine, Amazon had to exploit a fundamental misunderstanding that plagued Wall Street analysts for the first 2 decades of the company's existence. For years, financial pundits mocked Amazon for generating billions in revenue while showing near-zero net profit. They assumed the business model was flawed, but Amazon was not failing to make a profit. It was deliberately starving its taxable bottom line to feed its infrastructure. This operating doctrine was encapsulated in Jeff Bezos' famous maxim, "Your margin is my opportunity." Traditional retailers and software companies focused heavily on percentage margins. They wanted to keep a large slice of every dollar they made to distribute as dividends to shareholders. Amazon realized that percentage margins were a vulnerability. They did not care about percentages, they cared about absolute dollar-free cash flow. If you are a competitor who requires a 20% margin to keep your business alive, you cannot compete with an adversary who is perfectly happy operating at a 2% margin while doing 100 times your volume. Amazon systematically lowered the ceiling on pricing across entire industries, making the environment uninhabitable for anyone who lacked their infrastructural efficiency. They used their massive free cash flow, generated by their negative cash conversion cycle, to constantly expand the perimeter of their empire. This relentless drive to control the underlying infrastructure eventually forced Amazon into the final, most physical manifestation of its hidden machine, the last-mile delivery network. For years, Amazon relied on external partners like UPS, FedEx, and the United States Postal Service to deliver its packages. But as the Prime membership base swelled, and the promise of 2-day shipping became 1-day shipping, a critical breaking point arrived. The existing global logistics infrastructure simply was not built to handle the sheer density and speed of Amazon's volume. During the holiday season of 2013, a catastrophic systemic failure occurred. A surge in late orders caused major carriers to miss delivery deadlines, leaving thousands of customers without presents on Christmas morning. For Amazon, this was an unacceptable breach of the customer promise. But strategically, it was an exposure of a massive vulnerability. They were relying on third-party primitives to fulfill their core promise. The response was swift and staggering in its ambition. Amazon decided it would no longer just be a customer of the shipping industry, it would become the shipping industry. They launched Amazon Logistics. They didn't just lease a few trucks. They built an entirely parallel private postal service from scratch. They purchased fleets of Boeing 767 cargo planes, creating Prime Air. They ordered tens of thousands of custom-built delivery vans. They built a network of localized delivery stations to serve as the final nodes in their distribution web. They developed proprietary routing algorithms that dictated exactly which turns a driver should make to shave seconds off a route. The sheer scale of this capital expenditure was, and remains, a mathematical fortress. Today, to truly compete with Amazon's core offering, a new entrant doesn't just need a better app or a clever marketing campaign. They need to spend tens of billions of dollars a year pouring concrete, buying airplanes, coding logistics algorithms, and building data centers. The barrier to entry has moved from the digital realm to the heavy, unforgiving world of physical atoms and global supply chains. This is the reality of the moat, and it reveals why the modern regulatory and public view of Amazon is often so conflicted. The public sees an incredibly convenient store. Regulators see a monopolistic threat, but the truth is something more complex. Amazon is a toll booth. When you build the definitive infrastructure for modern commerce, the servers that host the stores, the warehouses that hold the goods, and the vans that deliver the packages, you stop being a mere participant in the market. You become the environment in which the market operates. For an independent brand today, this creates a brutal paradox. They desperately want to own their direct relationship with the consumer, but they cannot ignore the gravitational pull of the Amazon machine. If a brand refuses to sell on Amazon, a competitor will happily take their place and capture the search traffic. If the brand does sell on the platform, they are compelled to pay advertising fees to be visible. They must pay FBA fulfillment fees to guarantee the prime delivery speeds customers demand, and they must pay referral fees on the final sale. The convenience is the bait, the infrastructure is the hook. This brings us to the ultimate strategic lesson of Amazon's ascent. It is a lesson that applies to builders, executives, and investors across every sector of the economy. The lesson is this: sustainable competitive advantage rarely lives in the interface. We live in a business culture obsessed with surface-level disruption. Companies spend millions designing beautiful software, sleek packaging, and clever branding. They focus all their energy on the part of the business the customer touches, but interfaces can be cloned, algorithms can be copied, pricing can be matched. The companies that achieve generational dominance, the ones that become practically inevitable, do not build their moats out of aesthetic design or fleeting consumer trends. They build their moats out of the heavy, unglamorous, violently expensive machinery that operates beneath the surface. They actively seek out friction. Because if you can conquer the deep operational friction of an industry, whether it is the financial friction of managing inventory, the physical friction of moving millions of cardboard boxes, or the digital friction of provisioning server networks, you don't just win a customer's preference, you create structural dependency. The next time you click Buy Now, take a moment to look past the screen. Look past the promise of free shipping and the smile printed on the tape. You are not interacting with a retail store. You are triggering a localized event inside a global, self-funding logistical supercomputer. The convenience is just the byproduct. The machine in the shadows is the masterpiece. If you want to move beyond the surface-level narratives and understand the invisible mechanics that truly drive the world's most powerful companies, subscribe to this channel. We don't just read the headlines, we reverse engineer the systems